This is the beginning of Parshas Noach. I just want to mention, as an introduction, we talked about approaching the text in the simplest way possible, like an 11-year-old with a dictionary, just hoping that it'll make sense. That's definitely correct. That's why I think it's the most fruitful way to look at it. And I want to add that there are many different kinds of questions that could occur to someone. And I think the attitude has to be, if it's puzzling to you, ask. Nothing's off limits. What do the words mean? Why the subjects occur in a certain order? What's the motivation of the figures in the dialogue for what they're doing? What's their reasoning? Is it realistic? Is it the way we would do things? And if not, why not? What's the social structure? How do the economics work? Whatever occurs to you as something which needs some kind of investigation or explanation is certainly appropriate to ask. Some people have the feeling that since it's a holy text and it deals with things that are important to the heavens and the earth, maybe little things like where did he get the money to do that isn't worth asking. It is worth asking. The details count because from our point of view, these great themes and great ideas and values are projected into the details. And especially if the Torah mentions the detail, then it's something which has to find its place in the narrative and in the communication. So we're going to see today a variety of different types of questions that can be asked. And I'm just mentioning this to emphasize, you should use this as a springboard for allowing your imagination to run free, so to speak, when you're thinking about how to understand what we read. So, this is chapter 6, starting with verse 9. Let's put it this way. I'll read you what's written on the page. This is the Art Scroll translation, but we shouldn't take the translation for granted either. The book is originally written in Hebrew. When you see English words, someone chose those words. He chose them for a reason. Others, for different reasons, might choose other words. And that has to be explored also. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect, so to speak. We'll talk about that. And there should be no comma there. So righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noach walked with God. Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So now, look at those 2 lines and see what occurs to you. There's a number of different things here that really need to be thought about. Yeah?
It's kind of disconnected. These are the offspring of Noah, then the description of who was Noah, and then only his children.
Yeah, there seems to be an interruption here, and your helpful, friendly translator put in dashes. That was nice of him. But I think it's right. The dashes are right. Offspring is your children. The verse 9 starts with these are your offspring, then has all sorts of other material. And verse 10 finally gets around to telling you who the offspring are. So that certainly has to be understood. What else strikes you as meaningful? Yes?
Perfect is generations, so I would switch generation.
Okay, why is it your generations plural? Okay, yeah.
They say his generation because actually if he would have been in time of Abraham and others, he would have been compared like much low. He wouldn't have been so righteous.
That's true, and you're now offering an answer to the question, but that wasn't his question. His question is, why does it say generations? Why not just say in his generation? Your answer would be just as good for that. He's asking why is the word plural rather than singular? And it's a good question. We're looking for questions now, so let's see if we can. Yeah, another question.
Yeah, repeating here. Righteous man, perfect in his generation. Why do you need to specify also the word righteous? In the Hebrew, here it's written tzaddik. Tzaddik who follows God's commandments. There were no commandments back there, so how could he be tzaddik?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Here's a historical question. how do you call him tzaddik? Tzaddik is a person who follows God's commandments. The Torah hadn't been given yet. So why call him a tzaddik? Okay, very good. What else?
And then repeat, and Noah walked with God.
Okay. Now there I think you can think about what do you want to know about that phrase? Noah walked with God. You say it's a repeat. Okay, it could be a repeat. Is there something a little bit more fundamental that should bother you about Noah walked with God?
How could he walk with God?
Hey, what does it mean? You know, they didn't stroll hand in hand in the garden. So what do you mean he walked with God? He wasn't in the garden. Here, the question is simply, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, the words are not meaningful to me. I know what it refers to, and that's a very important type of question. I think there's another question here. Let me give you a parallel, and then see if you can insert it into the text and see where the question is. Suppose someone asks me, how tall is George? And I say, George? George is 6'2" in his class. What would you say? I mean, either he's 6'2" or he isn't. Class doesn't matter. The 6'2" doesn't describe a relationship he has to another group of people. It describes his height. Okay, well now what about righteous and perfect? Don't those sound like absolute terms? I mean, either you are or you aren't. So how can you put together righteous or perfect in his generations? Righteous and perfect sound like what we would call absolute terms. Either you are or you aren't. And in his generations, sounds like it's talking about a relationship to them or a comparison to them, which is not what righteous and perfect mean.
Relative to the standards?
Okay, so now the truth is, there are two ways out here. One is obvious, and the other one, I'll tell you both. And each of them, you have a conflict between righteous and perfect on the one hand, and in his generations on the other hand. There's a tension between the two of them. One, each way out stresses one at the expense of the other. So your way out, which is what some of the commentators say, righteous, listen, not exactly, not really. In comparison to the people in that generation, he could be called righteous. This is going back to what you said before. If you compare them, he looks good. He looks good because of the comparison to the people in his generation. But in absolute terms, certainly as compared to Abraham, he wouldn't look so righteous. So now, righteous, which we start off thinking is an absolute term, this explanation says, yeah, not always. It doesn't always have to be absolute. It could be a relative term. It doesn't mean really righteous. It means more righteous than them. So, okay, well, it was they, I guess. And that's taking the his generations as determining the meaning and loosening up on righteous and perfect to make them into relative terms instead of absolute terms. That's one way to do it.
Can I try to guess another way?
Yeah.
Relative to his potential?
That's quite a nice idea.
So he fulfilled his potential, but it was not the higher. So
But then it won't explain what the words in his generations is doing there.
as much as potential he could have in his generations.
Why would the potential depend upon the generations? So the point now was not to save the words on half of the words. The point was to explain both phrases working together. So I said each explanation comes down hard on one phrase and loosens the other phrase. So when we say righteous and perfect in his generations, we say really it means in his generations. It's really only a relative term. Righteous and perfect, no, okay, they really meant relatively here and not absolutely here. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, which I think is really remarkable, and it's in the commentators, is to say righteous and perfect are absolute. He was really righteous and really perfect. Why does it say in his generations? It means even in his generations, even in a context, an environment where the whole society was deteriorating, he managed to perform righteously and with perfection. So it would be an explanation of his greatness, adding to his greatness by saying in his generations. So there, righteous and perfect are absolute, and in his generations isn't in comparison to or relative to, as you might have thought. No, we're loosening that one up to say it's just mentioned in order to give him more praise for his accomplishment. The question?
I have two ideas. Why say in generations? One idea is that he lived through many generations.
Okay.
Before the flood and like after the flood. And also second thing is that it's considered his generation up to until giving of the Torah, maybe. So that's why.
Okay, he didn't live that long, but
I meant that since him until giving of Torah, before giving the Torah, it was maybe considered his generations, maybe.
I'm not following. You're explaining why the word generations is plural. The first explanation I understood, and it is a common explanation, if you live for 500 years or 600 years or 950 years, you live through many generations. If every generation starts again in 30 years, or 50 years, then you live through many generations. That's an easy way to answer the question, straightforwardly. That's why it says generations, because it's literally true. That I think I got, but the second half I didn't get.
Or up to until Abraham.
He lived up to Abraham, that's true. Abraham knew Shem. I don't know if Noah lived up to Abraham. But at any rate, okay, so we have an answer for that. I think that's very good. Now here's a subtle question which has been raised. Back to righteous and perfect in his generations with two explanations. One is righteous and perfect, not really. Not really. Only relative to them, which reduces his praise. It reduces his accomplishment. The other explanation is absolutely righteous and perfect, and even more so that he accomplished it in such a difficult generations, so his accomplishment is even greater. So one of the explanations pulls him down, and the other explanation builds him up. Now, given the verses we just read, what would you expect? To interpret it is building him up or pulling him down? What is the verse doing here? Isn't it building him up? Isn't it praising him? Is it showing how great he is? So let's say abstractly, if I take these words and take them out of the context, righteous and perfect in the generations, and I ask what does that mean, there are two ways to explain it. But surely here, speaking about Noach, it should be taken only in the way that builds him up, not in the way that pulls him down. And yet it's a disagreement in the Talmud how to take these words. So there's got to be a reason for having the possible interpretation that pulls him down. And we will see in a few minutes what that reason is. There's plenty of reason in a connected text to justify that. That's those words. Now, what does it mean? These are, when it says, these are offspring, and we had the interruption. So let me show you. Hold on to where we are because we're going to stay there, but go back and look on page 11. Here we're in the middle of describing the process of the creation of the universe. And verse 4 says, these are the products of the heaven and the earth when they were created on the day that Hashem, God, made the heavens and the earth and the heavens. These are the products. And on our page 31 it says, these are the offspring, but in Hebrew it's the same word. It's the exact same word, toldos. So maybe toldos doesn't have to mean just offspring, biological descendants. Maybe it can be used more generally. Things that you bring into existence, things that flow out of you, whether they're biological offspring or not. And the truth is that in English has borrowed this phraseology, probably from the Tanakh itself, from the Bible itself, since this was the most studied book in the history of the English language. Sometimes you'll hear a person say, Einstein was the father of the atom bomb. That doesn't mean he had a son named atom bomb. Lavoisier was the father of chemistry because his ideas started the discipline called chemistry. So when you bring something into existence, you can be, or father of his country, because he led the revolution or set up the first organized government or whatever he did. So the word in Hebrew, toldos, can mean that which you bring into existence. Then our verse is extremely fundamental. These are what Noach brought into existence. And then, as you pointed out, we have a description of his character, of his actions, and his biological children also. He brought a lot of things into existence. But here, the verse gives precedence to his character and his actions, and his biological children come after that. And from this, the oral tradition says, you see, that the most fundamental thing that great people, morally and spiritually great people, bring into the world is their character and their actions. And those are their fundamental contributions to the world, and their children are also contributions. But they're not as important as, so to speak, the lives that they lead. Now, having said all of that, you now tell me what you see when you read the first 7 words. Just the first 7 words at the top of the page. No one asked this question.
Why Noah was repeated?
Yeah, why is the name Noach repeated? You wouldn't write that in English, you'd say he. He was. So given what I just said, what's the answer? He made himself. We have a picture here of self-creativity. Now, it doesn't mean he brought himself into existence. That's impossible even for God. Right? But it means that a human being is created with a large space that's empty, unfilled. And when a human being makes free decisions, not only do his free decisions affect the world around him, but they also affect him. You build something in yourself by the decisions that you make. You build habits, or you can you can destroy habits, which may be a big step forward if you have bad habits. And you build your character by the decisions that you make. And in that respect, you become self-creative. Then this verse is saying something extremely fundamental. These are the products of Noach's activity, himself, and these aspects of his character and these aspects of his actions. Yes, they're all things that he brought into existence. We together so far? Okay. So now, let's take a look at the idea of he walked with God. Golly, it certainly sounds good. It sounds wonderful. But we asked, what does it mean? So let me show you another place where that phraseology is used before this. So it definitely would be relevant in understanding what it says here.
Choice of words. He didn't say halach, It doesn't say Elokim halach,
There are two things here. First of all, who's walking with who? You switch the order. It's Noach walking with God, not God walking with Noach.
Noach walked him, took him with him.
No. S here can mean with. S is not it's not a transitive verb. It's like halach ito means he went with him, right? Es can mean with, and here by salech,
Who took who? Who took who for a walk?
Well, again, it's not taking. The S here is not the sign of a direct object that A took B. It's rather the word with. It means they walked together. But when this I just need to know in general. When you have two subjects, right? I can say A walked with B, or I can say B walked with A, or I can say A and B walked together. Those are 3 different propositions. To say A walked with B means B's going, and A accompanied him. To say B walked with A means A's going, and B accompanied him. Who's the leader? Who's the one who's going on a journey? Who's the one who follows along? Okay? And if I say A and B walk together, it means they're equal. They're equally going on a journey, and it happens to be they're going in the same direction. Here it says Noach walked with God. That means to say, so to speak, God is walking, and Noach follows along, which is quite appropriate. Human beings should be following God. God shouldn't be following the human being, and the human being shouldn't be equal with God. Now, sounds like you know a little bit of Hebrew, you ask something else. You ask, why doesn't it say lalechet? Here it says lehis halech. And lalechet usually means to go to a destination. This means to be moving, walking, going, progressing. And it can be without, let's say, a specific destination. I'll tell you this because it's something worthwhile knowing. There's a story of a king who had one of his subjects, and he said, I'm ordering you to do the following job. Come with me, and he brings him into a room, and in the room, he sees a long wooden bar going out a sizable hole in the wall, and he says, rotate that bar, like this. That's what I want you to do. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, that's what I want you to do. He's the king. Fine. He does it months and months. After a year, the king comes back to inspect. Okay, rotating the bar. And the fellow says, I'd like to know what I'm doing. Like, what's on the other end of the bar? It's quite hard to push. And is there a mill out there and I'm grinding wheat? I'd just like to know what it is. Could I go outside behind and take a look? He says, sure, come with me. Comes out, finds, he sees, on the other end of the bar, there's a big stone. And that's it, just a big stone. Not connected to anything. So the guy says, I don't understand. A whole year, I was doing nothing. The king says, nothing? Look in the mirror. Look at your muscles. Oh, I was doing something. He says, that's what I thought. I thought I was milling grain. No, I was building myself. So this is the idea that what you do in the world has a double effect, has an external effect and an internal effect. This is a neglected area, largely neglected area in contemporary thought. Ethics and morality, today I would say 80 to 90% of the discussions about what effect your actions have. Do you violate the rights of others or support the rights of others? Did you do charity? Did you serve, if you're on the wrong side of the track, did you serve equity and inclusion? And they're all about the effects of your actions. There is another subject in classical ethics called virtue. Virtue is your own character. And virtue is very important because virtue defines your moral status. I'll give you a very simple example to understand this. I have a friend, George. I don't really, but this is a parable. A friend, George, and he has a problem. He has sticky fingers. He walks into places and he steals. That's what he does. I've talked to him. I've tried to reason with him. Nothing helps. I happen to know that George is going to Beijing on business. And I say to him, listen, George, I know you do this. I know what you do, but I want you to know, in Beijing, there are hidden cameras everywhere. There are plainclothes policemen everywhere. And if they catch you stealing, they chop off your hand. So I'm just recommending that, at least while you're there, try to control yourself. He goes there for some unaccountable reason. He trusts me and he believes what I tell him. And he doesn't steal while he's there. He stops stealing. He's there for 6 months and dies there of a heart attack. Did he become righteous the last 6 months of his life? Not at all, because a righteous person does what's right because it's right. He was doing what's right because he was scared. That's not righteousness. So your moral challenge in this world is not only to do the right things, it's to have the right values and act on the basis of those values. morality, defining what virtues are, and defining how they relate to one another, defining how you acquire them, does not take up much space in contemporary moral and ethical thought and discussion. Well, the Torah is very concerned with that, with both of them. So that's why this we talk about self creativity here, which again is not a wide subject, and then self creativity is through moral and spiritual excellence. Okay, having said all of that, let's go back to he walked with God. I want to show you that there's another place in which this phrase appears, and from that place, maybe we can get a hint, if we understand that place, as to what it means and how it would be relevant here. This is in the Begats, all the list of generations. Take a look on page 25. Now here, the generations, each generation gets 3 verses. Let's take a look. I'll show you the structure. Go up to the top of the page, verse 6. Shes lived 105 years and begot Enosh. So this is the son whose name we get, which Shes had when he was 105. Shes lived 807 years after begetting Enosh, got sons and daughters. All the days of Shes were 912 years, and he died. So this is the pattern. The first verse tells you how old the subject was when he begot his child. The second verse says he lived how many years after that, begetting sons and daughters. And the third verse sums it up. How many years did he live? And that's what it is. For Shes and Enosh and Canaan and Mahalalel and Yared, all the way down the page, each one gets 3 verses. Not at the bottom of the page. Bottom of the page, you have a different structure. Let's see, 21. Chanoch lived 65 years and begot Mishuselach. Okay, that's just like the first one of all the other trios. How old was he when he begot his son? Chanoch walked with God for 300 years after begetting Mishuselach and begot sons and daughters. So the second verse has an addition. Not only he lived 300 years, but he walked with God and lived for 300 years. Begot Mishuselach, and after having Mishuselach, begot sons and daughters. That's verse 2. Verse 3: all the days of Chanoch were 365 years. Yeah, but it doesn't say he died like it does in all the other trios. And now there's a fourth verse: Chanoch walked with God. Hey, wait a minute, we knew that. It said it 2 lines above. It says it again. Then he was no more, for God had taken him. This is a brand new picture with brand new elements. And it isn't as if the world changed and now the world is running on a different frequency, because if you turn over the page and look at the next generation, it goes back to the old pattern. Mishuselach lived 187 years, begot Lamech. Mishuselach lived 782 years after begetting Lamech, and he begot sons and daughters. Although Mishuselach 969 years, and he died. So you're back to the triple as you had before Chanoch. So Chanoch somehow is different, stands out as somehow unique, and that uniqueness is described by saying twice he walked with God. Okay? Now, one little fact. Do you see that Chanoch was really cheated here? How long did he live? What was the sum total of his life? Chanoch. 365, right? Well, let's just do a little tallying here. Shes lived 912. Enosh lived 905. Canaan 910. Mahalalel 895. Yared 962. Mishuselach, the longest lived of all of them, lived 969 years. And Chanoch got 365. Wow. That's a very drastic reduction. Like a 600-year reduction. Could that somehow be related to the fact that he walked with God. He's the only one who walked with God. Says it twice, and he has much shorter life than the others do. And the walk with God said twice, once in the character of his life, and once in the verse that says he was no more. So it sounds like he lived a life of walking with God, and that walking with God is an explanation for why, after 365, he was no more. So somehow, the walking with God has to be the explanation for why he had a much shorter life. At this point, the alarm bells were all ringing. But I don't think you can get more of an answer out of the verse. But the oral tradition preserves an answer. Hanoch was a righteous person, and he had right values and right goals, but he was weak. And he was susceptible to being affected by his environment. And he needed divine protection. And that's what it means he walked with God. He didn't undertake to extend himself to others, perhaps to engage in dialogue with others and to engage them in thinking about their style of life and what they're doing and what they're accomplishing and what they're not accomplishing. And the generations were deteriorating, heading for the flood. And God said, if he remains in the world, he's going to be overwhelmed by the external pressures. So I'm going to take him from the world early. So as to protect him. And that's why he says he was no more, for God had taken him. We know that life and death are in God's hands. If it says a person died, it's because God engineered that he should die. But here it says God took him. God took him to protect him. So that means, if that's a correct description of what it means to walk with God, walking with God is good, but it's two-sided. It's good, but it has a weakness built in. Are we together so far? You want to ask a question?
Yeah, it was about Enoch, but like all the other tzaddikim and like righteous people, like Hashem not like protect like that if they would fall or something like he only like I this here like it's interesting. Why so?
I don't think that's right. Kodesh Baruch Hu arranges the tests that we have to live with, and he manages our lives in such a way that we stand only for the tests that he wants us to stand. For example, Isaac lived to 180. Abraham lived to 175. Jacob lived to 147. So the oral tradition says, why did Abraham live 5 years less than Isaac? The answer is that Abraham's grandson, Esau, had not yet rebelled against the values of his father and grandfather. And then afterwards he did, and God took Abraham early so he shouldn't see his grandson rebel. He wanted to protect him from that. Indeed, Kodesh Baruch Hu promised Abraham, Tikaver b'seiva tova. When you bury and you look out, when you die and you're buried, and you look out at your world, everything will be good. Everything will be good. And he had to die 5 years early for that to be true. No one later could say that. It's an astonishing fact. When Isaac died, could he look out and say everything's good? He has Esau, his own son, who's the paradigm of evil. That wasn't good. He couldn't be satisfied with that. Jacob had the loss of Rachel, his wife, after only a few years, and he had the tension among the brothers, of which he was aware. He couldn't look out and say everything was good. Moses couldn't say it. He wanted to go into Eretz Israel. He was denied that. Everybody who died after Abraham died with having to put up with certain things which weren't pleasant and happy. Let's put it that way.
At the end, you mean, or throughout?
At the end of their lives.
Jacob didn't end when he wasn't relaxed. He was in Egypt with his sons and whatnot.
Well,
I mean,
things.
up to it.
Some of the things that he suffered were relieved towards the end of his life, but the tension between his sons and the fact that he lived out his life without Rachel was not something that he could. He sacrificed everything for her. So yeah.
Well, what about Ishmael?
And by the way, he was in Egypt. So that in itself is a terrible. Yeah.
What about Ishmael for Abraham? Ishmael, his eldest son.
Yes. What about him?
Wasn't he a kind of failure? Like he had to send him away.
Oh, what about Ishmael? That's a very interesting point. The fact is that Ishmael in the end did tshuva. He died righteous. This is very important. I'll just fill in a little bit if you know some of the stories. There's a whole long thing here. Yes, Ishmael was expelled from the house. God told Abraham he's got to do it. He didn't want to do it. Sarah told him that he's got to do it. He didn't want to do it. God told him he has to do it, and he did it. After that, you have the sacrifice of Isaac, which we will study in detail. And God says to Abraham, "I want you to take your son." So and then he says, "Your only one, whom you love, Isaac." And the Midrash asks, why does he have to say it 4 times? Right? Why wasn't saying your son enough? So the Midrash explains that Abraham played on his duality and said, "Take my son." Which one? I have 2 sons. Now, if you read beforehand, Ishmael was expelled and he's out and he's discarded, Abraham sounds like he's playing a game. The Midrash says Ishmael came back. That was the day he came back. The day he came back, God said, "Take your son." So he says, "I have 2 sons." And why did he come back? The Midrash says that Abraham kept tabs on Ishmael. And one of the things he did was he sent people to him to check his hospitality. In particular, he sent someone to him, and Ishmael wasn't home, but his wife was home. And the person asked for hospitality, and the wife said, "Get lost." So the person comes back to Abraham and says, "I went to Ishmael's house, and I asked his wife for hospitality, and she rejected me. So Abraham sent a message to Ishmael, 'Your wife isn't worthy of you,' and he got rid of her." So already you see something different in Ishmael. And then he sent another one, and he had remarried, and the wife did provide hospitality. So he saw that he'd set up a house in which hospitality was practiced. And that was when he invited him home. And the day that he arrived home, God said, "Take your son." It's an amazing midrash because it answers this obvious question: what do you mean, which one? Right? No, he has 2 sons. Right? So, there's a proof of it in the verses. It's also very interesting. When Abraham dies, he says was buried by his sons. And it says he was buried by his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, putting Isaac first. Even though Ishmael was 13 years older. 13 years older. He puts Isaac first because Ishmael accepted Isaac's superiority. It's another indication that he changed his character. When Isaac dies and he's buried by his 2 sons, it says Esau and Jacob. Esau was the oldest by minutes, thank you, and he took the leading position, and he did not recognize Jacob's superiority, and that's an indication of the fact that he was really consumed by evil. So Ishmael was not a problem for Abraham. And in fact, I'll go even a step further. When God says to Abraham, "Expel Ishmael," and it says it was very evil in Abraham's eyes, the commentators explain why was it evil in Abraham's eyes. Sarah said to do it. It was evil in Abraham's eyes, and God had to confirm it. One of the reasons it was evil because he says, "I know his weaknesses. I know he has failures, but he's going to turn around because God promised me that when I die, everything will be good." So clearly this is a temporary phase he's going through. Why should we kick him out? That was one of the several reasons that he had for thinking that it was a very evil idea. Okay, at any rate, so what we have now so far is, given what it says about Chanoch, walked with God, and the way in which it's understood, walking with God is a kind of equivocal praise. Now I want to bring another piece of evidence for this idea. Take a look on page 73. Look at chapter 17, verse 1, and tell me what you see. Walk before me. Doesn't say walk with me. Walk before me and be perfect. What does it say on page 31?
Walk with me.
Well, no, not quite. No. It says Noah walked with God, which is not the same as walk with me. And it says he was perfect, right? According to that translation. It's the same word in Hebrew. So, in Noah's case, he was perfect and he walked with God. With God. Here, because Baruch Hu says to Abraham, he commands him, walk before me and be perfect. Now, if you had only that evidence, these two verses, could you infer in any way which is superior, walking with God or walking before God?
With God sounds superior because God himself commands Abraham to walk before him. So it's like kind of like, I will watch your back, but nothing like superiority.
What do you say?
Here it says walk before me, and it's like walk for me while also still being perfect. Like it's more difficult.
Okay, given what I said before, that walking with God, you get a kind of divine protection, and here, walk before me means you're not connected in that way, and to be perfect. I hear you. It's a nice inference. I think that's true, but it would be our judgment that it's more difficult, and therefore it would be our judgment that it's superior. Is there anything in the verse that comes out of the verse itself without our having to respond with a judgment? I'm not saying what you say is wrong, but there's something I think even more direct. You mentioned it, but I think you have to turn it around. What does the text say about Noah? It says this is what he did. Okay. How does God feel about what he did? What's God's reaction to what he did? Doesn't say. Doesn't say, not in that verse. Here on 73, God says to Abraham, this is what I want. Here he's on record, this is what I want. From that alone, you have an indication that walking before me is superior to walking with me. Again, not that walking with God is bad, but walking before God is superior. And this is what the Midrash says. It's like a man who was going through the forest with two sons, an older son and a younger son. The older son, he says, you see that tree on top of that hill? Go climb the hill, go climb the tree and come back and tell me what you see. That he can say to the older son. The younger son says, Daddy, hold my hand. Hold my hand. Hold my hand. I'm with you. I'll go with you wherever you want to go. But hold my hand. Abraham's the older son. He can send him out before him to operate, so to speak, without that immediate divine protection. And Noah doesn't do it. Let's put it that way. We don't say like what he can and can't do, but Noah doesn't do it. He's walking with God. And that's going to help explain some of the upcoming context. So that's one of the reasons why we had to go through it. Look back. We're back on 31 now.
The Hayet Tamim bothers me.
Why?
It almost sounds like he's not perfect. Go be perfect.
I think that's right. First of all, let me comment that the word tamim in Hebrew doesn't really mean perfect in English. In fact, I don't think there's any word in Hebrew that connotes what perfect connotes in English. Perfect in English means it can't be improved. It couldn't possibly be better. Tamim can mean complete. It can mean pure, but it doesn't carry that absolute connotation that can't be improved and couldn't possibly be better. It doesn't carry that kind of thing. So now, when I say to someone to be tamim, which means to be complete or pure, that might be an accomplishment that varies with context. Let's take purity. So if you lead an isolated life, it might not be a struggle to be pure. But suppose that you now have to become involved and engaged in, let's say, communal activities. You know, we say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the way it's put. Take a person who's a good person, a pure person, and put him in a position of power. Now he has a new challenge. So if God is saying to him, I have something for you to do, and in that context it's going to be hard to remain, I'm telling you, even in that context, to remain pure, that would make a lot of sense. And I think it's definitely part of what's going on here.
Go out and continue to be perfect in that new scenario.
That's right. And because of the new scenario, it isn't a continuation of the old state of being. The old state of being was purity here. You now have to accomplish purity there, which is a separate accomplishment because the circumstances are different circumstances. This is, I think, a very important idea here. Okay, now back on page 31. Let's start with verse 13. I'll read this to you. I said at the beginning that you should let your imagination flow to think of all different kinds of questions that you might occur to you. Here's a question that's unlike anything we've spoken about so far, since we've been learning together. Let's see if someone gets it. God said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with robbery through them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them from the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make the ark with compartments. Cover it inside and outside and out with pitch. This is how you should make it: 300 cubits the length of the ark, 50 cubits its width, 30 cubits its height. A window you shall make for the ark, and to a cubit finish it above and above. Put the entrance of the ark in its side. Make it with bottom, second, and third decks. Now, a cubit is something like 20 or 22 inches. So 50 cubits is about 90 feet wide. 300 cubits is like 500 feet long. 30 cubits is like 50 feet high. That's a big box. That's a really big box. Okay? So, the sense of it is, the end of all flesh is coming. It's going to be due to a flood. Build a box. What occurs to you that you might ask here?
Why a box?
Why a box? What else would you have imagined that could have been in place of the box?
Ship.
A ship. Well, I'll tell you something. A friend of mine who's worked on this and many other things was Rabbi Meisman, one whom I mentioned over and over again. Did some research on this. Some models of this structure were built and placed in the open sea, and it turns out that they're very stable. At this size, they're very stable. So maybe it was really seaworthy. I mean, they weren't going anywhere. They just had to survive the fact that there wouldn't be any dry land, right? Anyway, but what else? What other alternatives might there be?
Circle, triangle.
Okay, how about different shape? Doesn't have to be this particular shape. Okay. Any other alternatives?
Maybe not at all. Go dig a hole, a cave, or something.
Oh, well, a hole, a cave, a satellite. Put them in space. Now think more drastically. What other alternative could there be?
More ships.
No, he's stepping away from that. You see, it's not a ship at all. It's a hole, or a mountain, or some other kind of thing.
How about nothing? Just
How about nothing?
take care of everybody else.
You're talking about the creator of the universe. So the all-powerful creator of the universe. Don't have anything. Just preserve them because you're the creator. That's the ikar question here, the deeper question here. Why does he command them to... It took 120 years. Think of the kind of primitive tools that they had to make this 500-foot long, 90 feet wide, 50 feet tall box.
And nowhere to leak in.
What?
It should not leak.
I should not pitch. Everything's going to be sealed inside and outside with pitch. You know, what was the whole project for? This is like a theological question. What is God's purpose in Noach's making the box? Now, I'll tell you what Rashi says, and I want you to tell me what you hear in what Rashi says. And then we'll connect to what we said before about walking with God. Rashi says, God told Noach to build the box so that people will ask him, what are you doing? This is going to attract attention. Even without CNN to report it, it's going to attract attention. It's going to get around, 10 years go by, 20 years go by, he's still building this box. And when people ask him why he's building the box, he'll say, because the evil of the earth is something which is leading to its destruction, and God is going to destroy it through a flood, unless you do something about it. And he told me to prepare for it. Now, I've given you the answer already. Let's try it again. God told Noach to build the box so that people will ask him what he's doing, so that he'll answer, the world is heading for a disastrous flood because of the evil that you are performing, so that maybe they'll change their minds and turn around.
He gave them the possibility to do teshuva.
Yes, but now, why does God need the box for? Why does he want him to build the box? That's it. The building of the box is to make them ask so he'll answer. Because if they don't ask, he won't say anything. He won't volunteer himself. He won't undertake to do something for them. So the box is to trigger their excitement, their interest, their curiosity to ask him. So in this very project of building the box, you have a picture of Noah walked with God. Hold your hand, hold my hand, hold my hand, I'll walk with you, but that's it, nothing more than that. And God is pushing him outside of himself, pushing him by giving him this project so as to force him to interact with others. That's how it works together with God, Noach walked with God. And as a matter of fact, it ended up as a failure, and it ended up that Noach tragically failed in this, and his life went to pieces after the flood. All of that we'll talk about later, Ms. Hashem. But that's the point of it. And here again, you see a weakness in Noach. Remember where we're coming from 25 minutes ago. There were two ways of explaining perfect and righteous in his generations, and one of them decreases his praise. And we're looking for background for decreasing his praise. So now we're finding some. And now I'm going to show you one more piece for today. Take a look at the next page, 33. Let's just stop at 17 on the top of the page. God is speaking to Noach. As for me, behold, I'm about to bring the flood waters upon the earth to destroy the earth. All flesh was there, and the breath of life under the heavens. Everything was in the earth. It shall expire. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark. That's how I'm saving you. You shall enter the ark. That's what it says in 18. Now look down at the bottom of the page, verse 7. Noach, with his sons, wives with him, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Do you hear a problem here? He didn't enter until the waters came, right? But even more than that, what does the verse at the bottom of the page tell you? It doesn't only tell you when he went in, it tells you why he went in. He went in because of the waters of the flood. Was there any other alternative in the background that you might have thought the Torah would have told us why he went in? Because
Hashem said so.
Hashem said so. How about that? The creator of the universe commanded him. No, that's not why he went in. He went in because the waters were up to his neck. From here, the tradition says, you see, he didn't really trust it. He didn't really absorb it, integrate it, the idea there's going to be a flood. So again, here's a weakness in Noah. So if you ask, where did that interpreter say, who says that righteous and perfect and righteous means in comparison to his generations, but not really, where's he coming from? If he's using this interpretation to pull Noah down, he'll say to you, listen, there's plenty in the general context which pulls him down. He's not an ideal person. Very great person, comparatively great, so there's but he's not an ideal person. And therefore I think the perfect and righteous is lowered by in his generations, unlike the other interpretation that is in spite of his generations and it makes his accomplishment greater. I say it makes his accomplishment lower. So you see that there is background justifying that interpretation. But this is the kind of investigation that you have to undertake to get to the, get what the text is trying to tell you. There's this infinity here, which we haven't touched. We will continue with this text tomorrow, Mr. Hashem. We have not exhausted it.